This is it, folks. Welcome to UFC for Utes. We've got two of the toughest vehicles you can buy in Australia today, and we're going to put them head to head. In the blue corner, we've got the Ford Ranger Raptor, which is $80,000 of high riding, hard tyres, and enough bash plates to probably make a Russian tank look puny. And in the red corner, we've got the Nissan Navara Pro-4X Warrior, which is $70,000 worth of off-road finishing school, and it looks like it's ready to conquer Mount Everest. Now this is a comparison with a difference. We're calling it dream versus reality. The dream is that you're going to buy one of these vehicles and you're going to head off into the wide blue yonder. Go places you've never been before, see things you never dreamed you could see. But the reality is it's going to drive you to work 5 days a week, help you pick up the kids from school, do the grocery run and all the other things that your busy urban life demands. So without further ado, let's get ready to rumble. Now we're not going to go into forensic detail about what these cars do and don't have, because it's a fair bet you've already read about that. But if you haven't, we'll pop the links to our reviews and videos in the description below. For now, suffice to say that these vehicles have all the suspension work and all the underbody protection that they need to go seriously off-road. Because prospective buyers want one of two things. They either want to know that they can go off-road and do go off-road, or they want to stand out in a crowd. But hey, we're not judging. So let's kick off this two-part comparo, dream versus reality. It's dream time. All right, time for some off-roading, and we're going to start in the Navara Warrior. Now, before we talk about how it's going on this track, I just wanted to cover off some of the interior feel, which to me is the most obvious area where this car trails the Raptor. Now you might expect that because it is $10,000 cheaper, which is not exactly chump change. It is a fair bit of money. But you look around the interior and you can see where this car just doesn't quite come up to the same levels as the Ranger. It's most obvious, for example, in the fit and finish on the dash, the materials used throughout. It's a bit of an old school entertainment system. I'm talking about the graphics. And then the driving position. There's no reach adjustment on the steering wheel, and the driver's seat has manual adjustment, whereas the Raptor gets electric adjustment. Now, as for off-roading, well, both of these cars will probably do more than any owner could ever want. I mean, a lot of that is down to the tyres, let's be honest. This one's wearing Coopers, and they are designed for decent off-road work. But it also comes down to the suspension and the four-wheel drive system, and let's not forget the 2.3 litre twin-turbo diesel engine up the front and transmission. It all works together really well. I mean, at times on some of this rougher stuff, the throttle can be a bit reactive. The engine's got quite a bit of punch when you want it to, but if you're just careful with your foot, it's really easy to just walk this car up over some of the toughest rocks that we've seen in quite some time. Steering is light, which is great because it does tend to move around and follow the bumps on the road, as I'm sure you just saw. But it is light. It is a big turning circle. You get that with a four-wheel drive. You do need to think about that if you're going up tracks and you need to make tight turns. But you're going to get that with any car that's got good off-road capabilities. Now, I don't know if you can see the angle of the trees outside the window, but this is quite a steep piece of track, and it's got a lot of loose rocks on it as well. But the Navara is just walking up it quite effortlessly. Honestly, it is amazing what vehicles like these can do off-road. Okay, now we've jumped into the Ranger Raptor for this next stage of hill climbing. And straight away you can see the interior is just at another level. First thing, so this steering wheel also does not have reach adjust, but it does feel like it's a bit further out in its position, which suits my driving position a bit better. You do have an electrically adjustable seat and a personal favourite, seat heaters. Gotta love them. Now, as for how the Raptor's off-road ability compares to the Navara's, well, for my money, the Raptor feels just that little bit more sure-footed. Feels a bit more stable on broken ground, and its suspension just seems to deal with the lumps and bumps with a bit more composure. That said, there's really not too much between the two. I don't think you're going to go out with a mate of yours in the other car and leave him far behind. I think these two cars could probably outstrip most people's wildest dreams when it comes to going beyond the bitumen. But if you had to pick one, and I do, I'd go for the Raptor. Now that could partly be down to the Raptor's tyres, BF Goodrich tyres, which just seem to have more of an aggressive tread block than the Warrior's Cooper tyres. And that could be an interesting thing to look back on when we get on the road, because there's a chance that this more aggressive tread block could result in noisier tyres on the bitumen. Now let's have a chat about how these cars go on-road. And if you're anything like me, given their incredible off-road ability, you'll be quite surprised at how composed they are on the bitumen as well. The Nissan Navara does have a bit of a firm ride, especially in the rear. And I think a lot of that is because it can carry a bigger payload in the rear, so you get stiffer springs. It tends to handle the bumps pretty well, and it does stay in its lane even when you start to push. At speed, the steering is quite light and quite direct. I like it. At lower speeds though, especially in parking, it weights up a lot, and that's when you notice the fact that it's almost 4 turns lock to lock. The Navara's engine is a 2.3 litre turbo diesel, twin turbo, compared to the Raptor's 2 litre twin turbo. This one only has 140 kilowatts and 450 newton meters. It's not a rocket ship by any means, but it's certainly got the pace to keep you going, and it'll sit at 80 to 100 kilometers an hour, loping along at just under 2,000 revs, which is good for fuel use. On the subject of fuel use, on the highway we're averaging around about 8 litres per 100, which is commendable because remember, this car weighs north of 2.3 tonnes and it has the aerodynamics of a house brick. The one area where you do feel the car's weight is in the brakes. They do the job, and they do the job fine, but you do need to push the pedal with a bit of effort to get it to really slow up. Now the last thing I'll mention about this car, and I will get to it with the Raptor as well, is road noise. Walking up to this car and seeing the really knobbly tyres on it, I was expecting it to really raise a din when we were on the bitumen. The fact is, it doesn't. It's actually quite quiet. I mean, yes, you can hear the tyres, but I don't think they're that much louder than you would expect out of some all-terrains, or potentially even some road bias tyres. And given how much they improve this vehicle's off-road ability, to me that's a compromise I'd be willing to make. Now we've jumped straight into the Ranger Raptor after getting out of the Navara Warrior, and I can tell straight away that these BF Goodrich tyres, they have a bit more thrum to them, but again, it's not enough to put me off. And like I said with the Warrior, their off-road ability more than makes up for any slight compromise on road. Another area where I'm picking up a big difference is in the ride quality. The Raptor has a more undulating ride. It tends to float a bit more over the bumps and yumps. That comes across as more comfortable and more cosseting. It doesn't stick as aggressively to the camber of the road or to the bumps in the road, so you do feel more comfortable as it heads on down the road. There's not much between the two in terms of steering, although it was interesting to note on the spec sheet that the Raptor has a worse turning circle, 12.9 metres compared to the Warrior's 12.5. When we compare the engines of the two, it's not chalk and cheese, but there are some definite differences that, in my opinion, make the Raptor's powertrain preferable to the Warrior's. It's only a 2 litre twin turbo diesel compared to the 2.3, but it makes more power and it has more torque, and it has a 10-speed automatic transmission. All in all, it has more smarts to pick the gears that you need when you need them. And it would need to be, because with a 10-speed, it'd be very easy for it to get tripped up. If there's an occasion where you need to pre-select a gear, like second or third when you're towing, you've got paddles on the steering wheel so that you can do that. But in general, I've been happy to leave the transmission in drive and let it work everything out, and I've got no complaints. In terms of in-cabin ambience, there's really not much to choose between the two as well. Both of them are not very aerodynamic, so you do get a bit of wind noise. A bit of the outside world also comes in. But again, we can have a natural conversation with the person in the passenger seat or the back seat. You don't really need to raise your voice. So for me, that's a tick in terms of living with these cars on the everyday. Also, I guess that would come in handy when you're having phone conversations via Bluetooth. And for me, that's a really big tick on both of these cars. I will admit I am very pleasantly surprised by how easy they are to live with. they're quiet, they're relatively refined, and yet they're utes that can climb mountains. Literally, I would be happy to drive these cars around for 12 months of the year. Probably the one area where the two of them would start to get at me is climbing up into the cabin every time. And I know for a fact that my wife, love her to death, but she is short, and my kids would have a hell of a time climbing up as well. At least with the Raptor, you get this handhold, whereas on the Navara, you've got to use the steering wheel to drag yourself in. So we're inside the Ford Raptor, and this is where you can see the extra $10,000 straight away. It's a much classier interior, and it has some nicer highlights, such as the red stitching on the leather dash, although this infotainment system really reminds me of the early 2000s BA Falcon. It hasn't changed a lot since then. The graphics are okay, but I guess that's where you can see that this fundamental ute underneath is a few years old, and there is a new one around the corner. As for what it's like to drive in here, well, the driving position's good, although I would like reach adjustment on the steering wheel. The seats are fantastic, really comfortable for long journeys, electric adjustment too. If I had to pick a niggle with this cabin, it's this. Why do I need a chime to tell me that the door's open? And how do I turn it off? Now, for all the gadgets and gizmos in the front, it's a pretty austere setting in the back here. There's not a lot to talk about, apart from map pockets, which is about it. It is a leather interior for starters, but there's no air vents here to keep you cool. There is no USB plug, although there is a 12-volt plug. The seats themselves are pretty good, and as you can see, I've got a decent amount of legroom and under-seat footroom here, which is not too bad. But the seats are not sculpted enough that when you get off-road, they're going to keep you in your place. For that, you're going to be holding onto this sucker quite a bit. Now, there are ISOFIX points for child car seats in both outboard seats in the back row, but you do need to bear in mind this is a taller car than your average SUV. So when you're lifting little Arlo up into the seat, you're going to need to lift higher than usual. Now, here we are in the Nissan Warrior. And it is a perfectly good, perfectly functional place to be, but it lacks a bit of the panache that the Ford Ranger Raptor has. You know, for example, hard plastics on the dashboard instead of the stitched leather of the Ranger Raptor. Infotainment system that has everything you need, but the graphics look like they were the mid-2000s. And a personal peeve of mine, switch blanks. What is it that this car doesn't have that I'm going to be reminded of every day of my ownership life? In some areas, the back of the Navara Warrior is better than the Ranger Raptor, but in other areas, it's not so good. One example of the not so good is legroom. I'm actually much closer to the front seat here, and the under-seat footroom is tighter. It's there, but it is tighter. An area where this car has it over the Raptor is we get air vents back here. We're not third-class citizens anymore, which is fantastic. We've also got a USB charging port here, and two more inside the center armrest. Like the Raptor, the Navara Warrior has the ISOFIX spots for child seats, but again, same caveat, you're going to be reaching pretty high with your little kid to get him into the seat. And one last thing, the Warrior has a window that opens, but the switch is all the way up the front. When it comes to the battle of the trays, it's really close. Both are around about the same size and have the same width between the wheel arches. The Raptor does have a power point inside its tray, but the Navara Warrior has more of these adjustable tie-down points. The Navara, as you can see, also has a lower loading height. But if we talk about payload, this is where the biggest difference comes in. The Navara is rated to carry 952 kilos. The Raptor can only carry 750, and that goes a long way to explaining why the Navara has a stiffer ride on the road. It needs stiffer springs to carry a bigger payload. To demonstrate whether we've got some sag here or not, I've got a few people to help me put 500 kilos in the tray. So, boys, come on up. There we go. All right, so there we go. That's a full load on the Navara, which I should also mention can tow 3,500 kilos, whereas the Raptor can only do 2,500 kilos. So now, let's get into the Raptor. And if that's not a scientific measurement, I don't know what is. Right, so where does that leave us in terms of a conclusion? Well, the Ranger Raptor has the nicer interior, it also has the more powerful engine, it's better off-road, and it's better on-road. The Navara, however, can tow more, it can carry more, it's also got the nicer back seat. But if I had to choose and I had to live with one, I'd be spending the extra 10 grand and going away with the Ford Ranger Raptor. Now, before you leave this video, don't forget to like it so that my wife knows I wasn't just away having a holiday with the boys. Hit subscribe so you get notified when we drop more videos. And if you want to know more about these cars, check out Drive.com.au for more reviews, comparisons and videos. See you next time.